Welcome to our program, General Newton.
Daniel, always good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Ukraine hit 41 Russian strategic bombers at 4 Russian strategic aviation airfields, including nuclear-capable aircraft. At least 13 Russian planes were fully destroyed, according to the Ukrainian security service. How can you assess this fascinating attack deep inside Russia?
First off, it was a brilliant, extraordinary military operation with great creativity, resolve, audacity. It's one of the most significant military operations that I can recall, certainly in my time on active duty and 12 years since I've transitioned to the private sector. So bravo to Ukraine, bravo to President Zelensky, and the fact that obviously displayed extraordinary mettle of Ukraine from a political aspect, from an intelligence aspect, and certainly from a very, as I mentioned, creative, ingenious military operation that I think has really put the long-range aviation, the strategic bomber forces of the Russian Air Force on their heels. Much like we saw Ukraine nearly destroy the Black Fleet of the Russian Navy, we're seeing now, as you mentioned, several aircraft nearly destroyed or destroyed in and of themselves of their long-range bomber forces that have been putting Ukraine and especially Ukrainian civilians in harm's way. But also, Daniel, it takes out a significant capability of a very limited long-range nuclear bomber force of the Russian Air Force. So that is good news for Ukraine. It's also good news, frankly, for the United States. So this is again, I salute Ukraine. I salute President Zelensky, and I certainly salute the men and women serving in the Ukrainian uniform in their military.
How can you assess the main consequences of this attack on Russia's ability to strike Ukraine with long-range missiles during this war?
This takes a very important tool out of their tool chest and their ability to strike against Ukraine. There's a geopolitical aspect to this from the military standpoint, certainly, that they now know that Ukraine can strike virtually anywhere deep inside Russia. So their bomber forces are going to have to be moved farther away, I believe, from the front lines. And the fact that they were also able to strike deep within Russian territory, 2,500 to 3,000 miles or kilometers deep into Russia, into their eastern bases, which means that those strategic bombers may or may not necessarily have been directly involved with the strikes against Ukraine, but now they're going to be unable to because they were struck also, which means the Russian bomber forces will lack spare aircraft and even spare parts. But the other aspect of this from a geopolitical standpoint on the battlefield is that President, again, Putin is going to have to readjust his own air defenses where he concentrates around, say, Moscow and other areas, is now going to have to be defending in places that he'd never contemplated before, and that his bomber forces, even in the eastern part of Russia, are now vulnerable. The third piece of this is I think it sends a message to not only the Ukrainian people, but also NATO and European allies, but the United States, there was a common misconception that Russia was winning the war. This strike on Sunday, certainly it's not necessarily what I would call a game changer, Daniel, but it certainly underscores that Ukraine is also capable of striking back, and that not so fast Russia may not necessarily be winning this conflict.
It is also interesting that many Russia's strategic bombers are no longer in production. So Russia cannot simply replace one bomber with a new one. For example, Tu-95 are no longer in Russia's production lines. What is your take on that?
Oh, that's a very key point you raised in your commentary and your question. My sources tell me that not only the Tu-95 Bear was those aircraft were struck, but also the Tu-22 backfires were struck as well. Russia has approximately 140 strategic bombers, and a significant number of those, say 25% or 30%, were either destroyed or damaged. That's a significant part of their long-range bomber arsenal taken out, which again takes away not only their ability to strike targets inside Ukraine, but also put into harm's way should the Russians ever decide to strike the United States with their nuclear bombers. A significant portion of them have been now reduced. And there are no there's no production line for the Tu-95, the Tu-22. It's very similar, Daniel, and I would express this to the American people, that if some adversary struck our B-52s or our B-1 bombers, we're very limited also in the number of our strategic bombers. We have about 140 or so. And so I'm relating this as an Air Force airman and an Air Force senior leader and a bomber pilot, by the way, who's flown with the Russian Air Force. This is significant from their operational playbook, taking that out, but also it has to be an impact on their morale, not only from Putin, but all the way down to the airmen on their flight line.
You just mentioned about morale. Recently, U.S. Special Representative on Ukraine, General Kit Kellogg, also says that the morale issues will arise with this attack inside Russia. There are more morale consequences for the Russian chain of command due to this recent attack of Ukraine. How do you see the main consequences for Russia from a psychological point of view for Russian leadership and also for Russian pilots?
I think it is significant. I think it's going to affect the perspective, if not perhaps even the morale of Putin, all the way down to the frontline soldiers. If it's demonstrated clearly, and it was on Sunday, that Ukraine can strike not only on the front lines against Russian forces, but deep into Russia, it will have an impact on their political leadership. It'll have an impact on their operational forces. It'll have an impact on certainly their operational leadership. But I have to think, Daniel, it's going to have now an impact on the morale of the Russian people. The fact that Putin has said all along that he will protect the Russian people, well, that calculus changed on Sunday. And so there is this aspect of spirit, of morale, and so forth that I believe can be consequential. Again, I want to keep in perspective. I don't believe that this is going to, it's not what we would call a game changer or perhaps significantly change the course of the war, but it will have a major impact, though, on how the war is conducted. And so we'll see in the ensuing weeks and months how this plays out. But there is an aspect of it from a political standpoint, from a operational standpoint on the battlefield, and most certainly from morale standpoint as well.
You also mentioned about Vladimir Putin. Russian dictator Putin has been telling his people that he is so-called Mr. Security for Russia. Do you see this attack on Russia's strategic aviation as a personal humiliation for Vladimir Putin?
Well, it certainly points out to be a false claim on his part that he can defend the Russian people, and that's clearly now not the case. I do believe that this is humiliation is a strong word, but I like a term that this is a slap in the face to Putin. Not only in terms of how he faces the oligarchs and the powerful people around him, but the Russian people, but also a slap in the face in terms of the perspective of those European leaders, and now certainly the perspective of the American people as well. We have a tendency to make Putin being into 10 feet tall, and he's not. And how he has gone about to try to make sure that the Russian people believe that this is a war that is justified, that he will not necessarily, as he ensues this conflict, he'll keep protecting the Russian people. Well, that's now not the case. And so he's got a challenge with this, what has been demonstrated capability that is putting in harm's way not only the Russian military forces, but Daniel, now the Russian people. I may add also that on the Ukrainian side of this, the audacity and the intelligence aspect and the special operations aspect of this, the use of drones, there, as my, again, what I've been able to discern, there aren't any, if any at all, civilian casualties on the Russian side. They went after legitimate military targets. And that underscores the effectiveness of the planning, but also the execution of the mission.
Also, many military experts believe that this attack revealed the main vulnerabilities of the main strategic aviation assets. How could this influence the balance of nuclear power and the nuclear power posture and posture of strategic aviation of main nuclear powers around the globe?
Well, certainly, Russia have a tri-leg of nuclear weapons capabilities. They have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They have sub-launched ballistic missiles from submarines. And the third leg is the air-breathing leg of strategic bomber forces, much like the United States. And what Ukraine has done is, as I mentioned earlier in my commentary, Ukraine has taken out a significant portion of those strategic long-range bomber assets, which have the capability to employ nuclear weapons. And so that is, from a geopolitical standpoint, not only having an effect on the battlefield between Ukraine and Russia, but also globally in Russia's ability to project power, in this case, nuclear power with their strategic bomber forces. And as we mentioned earlier, Daniel, their production line is specifically for the Tu-95 and the Tu-22. They're no longer open for production. And so it's not as if they can go back and put, find and build new airplanes to replace the ones that were destroyed by Ukraine. So that's another aspect to this. My final point, though, is also think in terms of how these bombers are dispersed in many locations. And it's reported that Ukraine was effective in going after 4 of the 5 major military bases that are home to these strategic bombers. And if they're being able to be attacked and to showcasing the vulnerability of that attack, that's another significant aspect of it. So I think it really does put Russia, especially their strategic bomber forces, on their heels.
Do you feel that this attack could force other nuclear nations to reconsider its security protocols regarding protection of its own strategic assets, strategic bombers?
I think it does. We saw that in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, but mainly between Israel and Iran, when Iran, if you recall, had those significant strategic missile strikes against Israel in April and October, and how that calculus has changed and Israel struck back and really went after their air defenses. In the same vein, with regard to what was an extraordinary operational mission on Ukraine on Sunday, this has called into question the ability for Russia to defend itself from the air in this case with small drones. And so I think it is. And let's take the United States, for example. President Trump has announced that he wants to pursue, and appropriately and effectively so, what they call a golden dome to protect the United States and the American people from long-range strategic missiles, hypersonic missiles, but also drones. And so this is now, I think this demonstration of capability that Ukraine conducted against Russia has put a premium on the need and how we move forward. And certainly in the United States, move forward with now a much more effective air defense system that includes certainly ballistic missiles, but also drones as well. And so that's something that I think you're going to see the United States and other, leading, for our case, our allies, but even some of the adversaries will put a premium now on how they defend themselves.
Also, US President Donald Trump has not yet commented on this attack of Ukraine on Russia. Do you feel that this attack could, for example, force Trump's administration to reconsider its stance on the war in Ukraine and its opinion on Ukraine's capabilities?
I think you'll see that. I certainly believe that President Trump is strongly in support of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, and so forth against this fight. And I would remind you don't need me to remind, but I remind the American people when I'm on air, the largest land invasion against any nation since World War II was when Russia brutally attacked Ukraine back in February 2022. We are now beyond 3 years and 3 months into this campaign. I would also remind the American people and our viewers, and you know this better than I do, Daniel, that what Putin has done has attacked innocent civilians, infrastructure as well, war crimes to great extent. And what Ukraine did was went after some of the capabilities, significant capabilities that conduct those strikes against innocent civilians. President Trump is clearly aware of that. He just wants the killing to stop on both sides. But nonetheless, I believe that this strike is a wake-up call for everybody. And I'm sure that President Trump and the administration are clearly taking into context what this means. We still have, in my view, if I were advising the president, we still need to enforce even more economic sanctions. Enforcing those sanctions, I do believe it's important that we continue to support the Ukrainian military with arms and capabilities. But let's also put into context. Let's give President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people credit here. These drones that carried out this operation were actually built in Ukraine. And my sources tell me that up to 2 million drones are built annually now inside of Ukraine. So it's a formidable capability that Ukraine has. But that also, however, I think it's important that the United States and our allied partners in Europe especially continue to provide arms for Ukraine not only to defend itself, but perhaps try to turn the tide against Putin. Because the only thing Putin understands is power. The only thing he understands is military capability. And the more we're able to provide that to Ukraine, and Ukraine can fight and perhaps even approach winning this conflict to get Ukraine, or rather get Putin and Russia at the negotiating table for a ceasefire and a permanent peace in favor of Ukraine and U.S. national security interests is key.
From your perspective, do you believe that Ukraine still can turn the tide on the ground in this war in Ukraine? And what would it take for Ukraine to actually turn the tide in this war in its own favor?
Very difficult on the ground right now. We're practically in a stalemate. And so what Ukraine has done, again, I go back to the audacity and the creativity of this operation and what will be future operations, I'm sure, Daniel, is where Ukraine has a disadvantage on the ground, certainly in the eastern part of the Donbass region and so forth. It has found avenues or operational capabilities to thwart the advantage Russia has on the ground, principally through the air and through these special operations missions. I predict and I foresee, and I would actually advise President Zelensky and his military leaders, I'm sure they're doing this, to think of ways that they can go after Russian capabilities, penetrate Russian defenses, whereby maybe they can't, through this war of attrition that we're seeing, a bloody war of attrition on the front lines in eastern part of Ukraine, to find other avenues to have an impact on the overall battle against Putin and Russia. Will it come to a point where it will be, total victory for Ukraine? I doubt that. That's very difficult to ensue. But the but is, I think it can force Putin's hand to the negotiating table, where conditions through a negotiated settlement could also somewhat be in favor of Ukraine. And so we'll see how that plays out. But I have to think that now President Zelensky and Ukraine have a stronger hand as a result of the attack on Sunday.
You just mentioned about negotiations. Ukraine participated in another round of negotiations in Istanbul recently. How can you assess Russia's negotiating position? Because they demanded from Ukraine full withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from its own 4 regions, and also they demanded other unrealistic concessions from Ukraine. What is your assessment of this offer?
Let me take your commentary. Unrealistic concessions. And indeed, that hasn't changed, Daniel, nor do I foresee it to change unless there are other aspects of things that challenge Putin. That would be from an economic sanction standpoint, from the United States and others continuing to arm Ukraine, that we're not going to withdraw our support of Ukraine from a geopolitical standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and a military standpoint. Let's face it, Putin only wants one thing, and that is to topple Zelensky, topple Ukraine, install his own puppet government within Ukraine, and make it now part of Russia, what would be the former Soviet Union. And he'll want to do that with Ukraine, but there's other Baltic states that he'll want to do that with as well. That's his objective, and that hasn't changed, nor would I anticipate that to change unless there's other forcing functions, Daniel, that compel him to change his position, tell him to, have more concessions. And as I mentioned, where those are going to come from, it's going to come from very, very strong, stringent economic sanctions led by the United States. It's going to come from the enforcement of those sanctions, not only with the United States, but also with our European allies. But also it will do we have to go out and sanction some of the support that Russia faces, say with China, with its economic relationships and so forth. That plays a key here. And so those are the things that are going to have to stand up to Putin. That's the only thing he's going to understand. But nonetheless, I don't believe it's going to be just one on the battlefield. It's going to have to be a holistic, whole-scale economic sanctions, economic enforcements, certainly diplomatic, and as well as providing the means for Ukraine not only to defend itself, but defending itself by now operational offensive measures where it can keep Putin's forces in harm's way and keep him off balance, frankly.
Thank you, General Newton, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you, Daniel. It's always good to be with you, and my best wishes to the Ukrainian people.